HOA demanded keys to my gate so they can get to lake faster, finds cops at their door. They say home is where you find peace, but mine became the source of my deepest turmoil. A simple request from my Homeowners Association morphed into a demand that would push me to the edge of my sanity and theirs. Little did they know I'd fight harder than anyone to protect what was mine. My struggles awakened a vengeful force within me, and soon the entire community would be on edge. How did one key, a simple, ordinary key, ignite so much chaos? Stay tuned, because by the end of this story, you'll see how one act of arrogance led to an epic comeuppance that none of us will ever forget. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. My name is Sarah. Growing up, I never thought I'd end up in a suburb overshadowed by an overbearing homeowners association, nor did I imagine the day I'd show up at their door with my chest pounding in anger. Yet here I am, living in a beautiful house perched by the lakeside, tormented by the very people who were supposedly charged with keeping the neighborhood friendly and organized. Friendly, it turned out, was just a facade. Organized was code for controlling. I had no idea how deeply their demands would twist my world or how far I would go to fight back. This story begins with my quiet resolve to leave my old life behind. After a tumultuous divorce, I was desperate for a new chapter, something that was just mine. I found an incredible property near a secluded lake, a place where I could retreat and nurse my wounds in peace. It was perfect. A stately cottage, a sprawling backyard, and a private gate opening to a footpath that led to the tranquil water's edge. My first nights, there were pure bliss. I'd never felt so connected to a place in my life, as if the lake's gentle waves whispered healing truths into my broken heart. However, the honeymoon with my newfound sanctuary was short-lived. The local HOA, a group of middle-aged, self-important individuals who flaunted their so-called authority like badges of honor, wasted no time in attempting to rope me into their world. It started innocently enough, a letter in the mail welcoming me, with a request for me to attend a meet and greet at the neighborhood clubhouse. I chalked it up to community spirit. Maybe these people just wanted to get to know the new resident. Eager to make a fresh start, I attended with cautious optimism. At that first meeting, I found a group of neighbors huddled in a circle around a table draped in a crisp white cloth. Trays of appetizers lined the table, pretentious cheese platters, meticulously arranged fruit, and finger sandwiches that appeared so perfectly cut it was almost comical. In the center of them all was Mary Ann, the HOA president. She was a tall woman with a stiff posture, razor-sharp brown eyes, and a perpetual smirk. She wore a sweater set, pearls glinting under the fluorescent lights, exuding an air of superiority. Her welcome was warm enough on the surface, but something under her words felt rehearsed. When I mentioned that I lived in the corner house backing the lake, her eyes gleamed a little too brightly. "Oh, that property. The gate is still there, yes?" she asked, exchanging quick glances with a man standing near her shoulder. I nodded, not quite understanding why that was a point of interest. The man, a wiry, bespectacled figure I'd later learn was named Donald, smiled thinly. Mary Ann cleared her throat. "The gate isn't part of the original community design. The previous owners secured a private agreement allowing that path for their personal lake access. It's an interesting perk." She said the word perk like she had a sour taste in her mouth. Something in her tone made me feel uneasy. It was clear that the gate had a history in the neighborhood, and it wasn't one everyone agreed with. Still, I smiled politely, trying not to jump to conclusions about their intentions. That night, after awkward small talk, I slipped away early, determined to simply live my life peacefully and stay out of neighborhood politics. Weeks passed, and I invested myself in renovating my new home. I carved out a little reading nook by the bay window, replaced the fences out front, and arranged my furniture to soak up the lakeside view. Occasionally, neighbors would pass by and wave, but I sensed a tension that lingered just under the surface, especially from certain members of the HOA. Then came the first real sign that something was amiss. A typed letter was slipped under my door, bearing the HOA's official logo at the top. It read, "Dear Miss Sarah, in accordance with the governing policies of the Lakeview community, we request a copy of any and all keys related to property structures that might affect communal lake access. As you are in possession of a private gate leading to the shared lakefront, it is required that you furnish an additional key for immediate official use. Please deliver the key to the HOA office by the end of the week or face official sanctions. Sincerely, Mary Ann, HOA president." Reading it felt like a slap in the face. The gall. They were basically demanding I hand over my private gate key so they could come and go as they pleased. What official use did they need it for? The letter reeked of a sense of entitlement. Why had the HOA never demanded such a thing from my home's previous owners? Or had they tried and been refused? My immediate response was a surge of defiance. That gate was part of the property I bought, an extension of the land that was legally mine. The path behind it was a private extension leading to the water's edge. This was not a shared community pathway. No matter how many rules they conjured, I had no intention of relinquishing the keys to my sanctuary. I decided to consult the property's deed. Late into the night, I dug through every page of the paperwork, scanning lines of legal jargon, searching for anything that would clarify whether the HOA had a leg to stand on. Finally, at 3 a.m, I found the relevant clause. The prior owners had secured a legal easement for direct lake access. The easement was documented and well within my rights to keep private. There was no mention of an obligation to share this gate with anyone else. My relief was overwhelming. The next day, I drafted a polite but firm letter. "Dear Mary Ann and members of the HOA, I have reviewed the deed and can confirm that the gate is part of a private easement legally attached to my property. I am under no obligation to provide a key to the HOA or to open my gate for community purposes. Please respect my rights to my private property. Best regards, Sarah." I hoped that would end things. Foolish hope. Within a day, I was served another notice, this time threatening me with daily fines if I continued to withhold the key. The nerve of these people. Clearly, they believed they could bully me into compliance, but the more they pushed, the more I dug in my heels. A rebellious streak I'd never fully acknowledged before suddenly flared to life inside me, fueled by the injustice of it all. During this time, I became acquainted with an elderly neighbor, Miss Hatcher. She was a widow who had lived in the community for decades, far longer than anyone else. We struck up conversations here and there, and before long, we'd find ourselves talking for hours in her small living room, sipping tea and munching on shortbread cookies. Miss Hatcher had her own run-ins with the HOA over the years. She recalled times when they tried to control everything from the color of her shutters to the type of flowers in her garden. "They think they own the entire neighborhood," Miss Hatcher said, hands trembling around her teacup. Mary Ann became president 5 years ago, and ever since, the demands have only grown. It's like she needs to prove she's in control of all our lives. I shared with her the drama over my gate. Miss Hatcher just shook her head. They probably want a shortcut to the lake for themselves. Maybe they even think they can host events or something there. That's how it always goes, some new project that benefits them personally. I felt a twinge of validation. At least someone understood the ridiculousness of it all. Little did I know, the HOA was just warming up their campaign of pressure against me. Days later, I discovered a bright orange notice pinned to my front door, stating that I was out of compliance with HOA rules. The alleged violation? Unauthorized signage. I quickly scanned my yard. There wasn't a single sign in sight. Confused, the first peeled the notice off, marched to the clubhouse, and demanded an explanation. Donald, the bespectacled man I recognized from the first meeting, stared at me coolly from behind a reception desk. "We received a report that you had posted a keep out a sign on your back gate," he said. "That's not in line with our aesthetic standards. You were supposed to submit it for approval. Since you did not, you face a fine." I couldn't even form words at first. "You're telling me that because I put a small sign on my personal gate, which is hidden behind my home, and didn't run it by you first, I'm going to be fined?" He shrugged. "Rules are rules, Miss Sarah. If it's part of the overall neighborhood design, it must be approved." My indignation surged. "The sign's not visible from the street. It's in my backyard, on my private property, clearly marking my private gate. How does that impact the neighborhood design?" Donald tapped his pen on a thick binder. "Everything in this community must meet HOA standards. You'll receive the invoice in the mail." That was the first time I slammed the door on anyone. Storming home, I felt my blood boiling. This was an obvious attempt at intimidation, a tactic to make me cave and hand over my key. If I complied with the sign, fine, what next? They'd only keep escalating until I surrendered. It was war, and I was done playing nice. Word spread through the neighborhood that I was in the HOA's crosshairs. A few sympathetic neighbors began offering their support. One young couple, Karen and Louise, dropped by with a batch of homemade cookies, confessing that they had been threatened with fines for overly flamboyant holiday decorations the previous year. Another neighbor, Mr. Irving, shared that the HOA once demanded to inspect his shed for potential code violations. "They're on a power trip," he said. "Don't back down." Each story fueled me further. But Marianne and her cronies weren't finished. They doubled down on their demands for my gate key, sending multiple letters and even placing phone calls. They insisted it was for emergency access to the lake. The entire premise was absurd. Why would they need a key to my private gate for an emergency when there were already multiple public entry points around the lake? I knew it was all about convenience and control. Tensions skyrocketed one evening when I returned from running errands to find Donald and a couple of other HOA members standing in my backyard on my property, examining the lock on my gate. My heart thundered in my chest. I marched straight up to them. "What do you think you're doing?" Donald turned, startled to see me. We have reason to believe the lock might not be HOA approved. We were checking to ensure it meets community standards." "Get out," I hissed through clenched teeth. "You have no right to be here." He tried to sputter an argument, but my fury was unstoppable. "If you ever set foot on my property again without my permission, I will call the police. Is that clear?" They left, but the encounter left me trembling. My home, my sanctuary, felt violated. The place I'd chosen to heal, to find myself again, was under siege by people who believed they had every right to pry into my private life. That night, fear and anger waged a war in my heart, but anger won. I refused to be bullied. I began documenting every interaction, saving every letter, recording phone calls when legally permissible in my state. I set up motion sensor lights in the backyard and installed security cameras. I researched every local ordinance and HOA bylaw I could find. If they were going to escalate this, I would be prepared. And they did escalate in a way I never expected. One weekend, Marianne herself showed up on my doorstep with a notepad and camera. She wore her usual sweater set and pearl necklace, her lips curved in a slight sneer that pretended to be a smile. "Miss Sarah, we've received multiple noise complaints from neighbors about loud music and disruptive gatherings at your home. I'm here to check for violations and speak with you directly." I was speechless. Noise complaints? I live alone. I haven't thrown a single party or had loud music blasting. Ever. Marianne raised an eyebrow. "We do have documented reports, but if you'd prefer, we can skip the formalities of an inspection if you..." She let the offer dangle. I understood exactly what she was implying. If I just complied with handing over that key, she could make these complaints disappear. My hands balled into fists at my sides. No, I won't be blackmailed. File whatever you want, but I'll fight it, she shrugged. Suit yourself. You'll be hearing from our committee. She snapped a few pictures of my front yard, her flash reflecting off the windows with irritating brightness, then scribbled something in her notepad before leaving. Over the next 2 weeks, the HOA bombarded me with notifications of fines, potential liens against my property, and new demands, all hinged on the claim that I was in violation of excessive noise, unauthorized signage, refusal to comply with HOA regulations, and on and on. They publicly posted in the community's online message board that I was uncooperative and unneighborly. It was a smear campaign, an outright attempt to isolate me. I nearly crumbled under the pressure, especially when I started receiving calls from unknown numbers at all hours. Sometimes there was just silence. Other times the caller threatened me. "You're ruining the neighborhood. We'll drive you out." I felt a persistent knot of anxiety in my stomach, rarely sleeping more than a few hours a night. One cold morning, Miss Hatcher invited me for tea again. She could tell I was unraveling. As I sat in her living room, my eyes burning from lack of sleep, she placed her soft hand on mine. "It's time to stand up for yourself in a way they can't ignore." I swallowed back tears. What else can I do? I've tried logic, reason, everything. They won't stop. Miss Hatcher's eyes glinted with a certain mischievous light. "Sometimes you fight fire with fire. I've lived here long enough to know this HOA thrives on intimidation and the belief no one will challenge them legally. But you can, and you must." A tremor of resolve coursed through me. "I'll do whatever it takes." That day, I contacted a lawyer recommended by Miss Hatcher. His name was Miles, a calm, methodical sort of man with a reassuring presence. He walked me through my rights, verifying that the gate was indeed private property. He suggested we collect enough evidence to file charges for trespassing, harassment, and defamation if necessary. "The minute they stepped onto your property uninvited, they crossed the line," Miles said. "If you have footage of that, we can leverage it." I handed over the camera recordings I had of Donald and the other HOA members in my backyard. Miles's eyes lit up. "This is solid proof. Let's see how they like having the law turned on them for once." We decided to draft a cease and desist letter detailing every instance of their intrusive behavior, their slanderous claims about noise complaints, and their repeated attempts to coerce me. It ended with a clear warning. If they didn't stop immediately, we'd pursue legal action. But I wanted more than just a cease and desist. I wanted them to know the fear they'd inflicted on me. So I hatched a plan that balanced on the thin line between retribution and justice. It started with me ignoring their next wave of official notices. Let them stew, I thought. Let them believe they're winning. Then, on a Saturday, I overheard Marianne and Donald in my backyard. This time, they had the audacity to try picking the lock on my gate. My security camera captured them crouched by the latch. My heart pounded. Finally, the moment had come. I dialed the police. I paced my living room, adrenaline surging, as I watched them on the live security feed. I saw Donald yank out a small toolkit, slipping a pick inside the keyhole. My chest tightened with anger, but also with anticipation. When the officers arrived, I met them out front and led them around back. Marianne and Donald didn't see us until it was too late. They were so focused on the lock that the first they noticed anything was the beam of a flashlight cutting through the dusk. "What's going on here?" one of the officers demanded, voice stern. Marianne shot upright, face blanching. We have authority over all aspects of the neighborhood. This gate is out of compliance." The officer glanced at me. "MAAM? Is it true they have permission to be here and tamper with your gate?" My heart hammered in my ribs. Absolutely not. This is my private property, and I have not given them permission to enter or touch my lock. Marianne tried to argue that the HOA governed all fences and gates in the neighborhood, but the officer's skepticism was clear. Once they saw the security footage, The police led Marianne and Donald off my property. I pressed charges for attempted trespassing and vandalism. As they were escorted away, Donald's face flushed with humiliation, and Marianne cast me a withering glare that was almost venomous. Over the next few days, word spread like wildfire. The HOA president and her right-hand man had been caught trying to break into my private gate, and the cops had shown up. It was a scandal that rocked the entire community. Neighbors buzzed with gossip, and many privately expressed relief, glad someone finally stood up to them. Others were outraged, but not at me, at the HOA board members who had abused their power for so long. It was as if the veil of fear had been lifted. Marianne and Donald posted a defensive statement online, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that they had legitimate reasons to inspect my gate. But my footage told a different story, one of them crouching with lockpicks in hand, which hardly looked like official neighborhood business. The cease and desist letter had been delivered, the charges were pending, and I was fully prepared to face them in court if it came to that. Strangely enough, it never did. After a tense month, the harassment stopped. The HOA board held an emergency meeting behind closed doors. Rumor had it, Marianne stepped down as president in order to avoid any further legal entanglements, while Donald was quietly removed from his post. No official apology was ever given, but the daily fines, the bogus complaints, the intimidation ceased completely. Meanwhile, Miss Hatcher, who had watched the fiasco with a sly twinkle in her eye, decided to spread a bit of positive gossip around. She told everyone how I had the courage to confront bullies, how I stood my ground despite the mounting pressure. Neighbors who had previously seemed distant began approaching me on friendlier terms, asking how I was doing, offering help if I needed it. Karen and Louise asked me to join them for a barbecue, while Mr. Irving gifted me a potted plant for my porch. The hostility that once hung in the air evaporated, leaving a fragile sense of unity. I felt a quiet triumph, not just in defending my property, but in rediscovering my own resilience. I realized that my divorce, my move, my yearning for a peaceful life, none of it had diminished my strength. If anything, this trial by fire revealed a hidden grit I never knew I possessed. For too long, I had let life's circumstances break me, but in standing up to the HOA, I had reclaimed pieces of myself I'd lost. Looking back, I couldn't help feeling a strange gratitude toward Marianne. She, and the rest of the HOA leadership, had forced me to rise, to fight for what was mine, to show myself and the community that I was not a woman to be trifled with. In that painful process, I found allies, earned respect, and discovered my voice. When the dust settled, I finally began to enjoy my lake view. I'd watch the sun set over the water, feeling peace wash over me. No more hateful letters or ridiculous fines, only the gentle lap of the waves. Though the scars of the conflict remained, so did the knowledge that I had triumphed, that I was more than just the victim of a toxic marriage or an overbearing HOA. I was a fighter, and I'd proven it. A few months later, an HOA representative, a newly elected one, reached out to me. His name was Darren, a soft-spoken man in his 40s who had the humility to apologize for what I'd gone through. "I'm working on revising the association's protocols," he explained over the phone. "We don't want another incident like yours to happen again. We hope you'll consider participating in our community discussions moving forward, as your perspective is valuable." A part of me bristled at any association with the HOA, but I also saw an opportunity to shape the neighborhood for the better. After some soul-searching, I agreed to attend a meeting. It was a subdued affair, no lavish spreads, no condescending remarks. Marianne was absent, her legacy a cautionary tale. I sat with Darren and a handful of other board members, offering my input on how to handle private property rights, how to treat neighbors with respect, how to ensure that personal vendettas never again masqueraded as official duties. When I left that meeting, I felt surprisingly lighter. For the first time since this saga began, I had hoped that positive change could root itself in our lakeside community. Maybe my conflict served as a wake-up call. Maybe it was the impetus that would transform our neighborhood into a place where people didn't have to live in fear of those who claimed to be in charge. That same night, as I walked down the path to my gate, the sky blazed with twilight colors. The lake shimmered like liquid gold. The fence and gate that once symbolized my isolation and vulnerability now stood as a reminder of my determination. I placed my hand on the lock, feeling a surge of gratitude. This piece of land and water was mine to enjoy safely and without harassment. Before heading back inside, I took a moment to close my eyes, breathing in the crisp air, absorbing the hum of cicadas in the distance. And I felt that deep sense of belonging, of being anchored in my own life again. This was my home, and no one would ever take that away from me. Reclaiming my power wasn't just about outmaneuvering an HOA or winning a legal battle. It was about learning that I had the right to live without fear, that I could stand tall against those who sought to push me down. That knowledge changed everything for me. I had found true support from good neighbors and an honest attorney who believed in me, and I had found happiness in a hard-won peace. Some nights, I'd hear rumors, whispered speculation that Mary Ann might attempt to rally her old cohorts and seize power again. But if she ever tried, she'd find this community a changed place. She'd find me a changed woman, and if she dared come near my gate again, well, the cops knew the way to her door. She'd certainly never forget that. Thank you for joining me on this journey of defiance and redemption, a story of how an ordinary key became the catalyst for a clash that upended an entire neighborhood's status quo. In standing my ground, one discovered hidden strengths, supportive allies, and, ultimately, a renewed sense of belonging. If you found yourself on the edge of your seat, eager to see how each twist would unfold, I hope my story reminds you that sometimes the only way out is through, and that standing up for what's right can bring about real change. For more captivating tales of courage, drama, and twists at every turn, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel. There's always another riveting story just around the corner.